Wonderful to meet you. Thank you
Nice
so
meeting
much for
you.
taking a minute out today.
Absolutely. I'm
So,
stoked to be here.
yes, it's great. So, let's start our journey into your work by asking you this. 5 years ago, we were knee deep in this pandemic. We were,
Oh,
oh, yeah, with the unknowns, everything was happening. So, now, as the dust has kind of settled, how did you make it through that time period and how has it affected your work?
man, it's such a good question. I was struggling in 2020. I was newly postpartum. My husband and I had two children, and my son was, I had one day back at work. I was a director for a surgeon's office at the time, and I had one day back from maternity leave before everything went into lockdown.
Yeah.
And so that time was really spent. It was actually kind of nice. Like we got a lot of close time. It was just me, my husband, our two kids. We got a lot of that time.
Yeah.
And during that time, both of our drinking just kind of like increased. I just didn't really have a lot of direction. I had graduated with my master's a couple years prior and just didn't want to do therapy anymore and was just very like kind of lost and dazed and confused and
Yeah.
feeling like a total loser. And so there was a lot of that stuff going on. So around then is where I chose to kind of go into this full practice in the way that I'm doing it now. And I actually launched in June of 2020. It was supposed to be virtual, but in Las Vegas, we had much less strict restrictions. And so
Yeah.
I started actually in person and virtuals. And it was really great because it did propel us forward. And there were just, drinking got pretty poor. I mostly stopped. My husband kept going without my knowledge. And so there was a lot of that shit going
Yeah.
on. It was rough.
Yeah. So let's
Yeah.
get into exactly what you're doing right now in 2025. I'm going to put you in front of a bunch of 12-year-olds. It's career day. The kid in the back of the room is like, "Hey, what do you do for a living?" What's your answer?
Yes, I help people when they feel angry to know what's coming up for them and what to do with it. And I mainly work with your parents to help them keep themselves calm. So when you are having a hard time, they don't have a hard time.
So, what did you want to be when you were 12? When you were a kid, what was your dream life?
I wanted to be a pediatrician, which is
Okay.
wild because I'm not a kid person. I don't know where that came from. I lasted about one semester pre-med, and then I wanted to go into psychology.
So, talk to me a little bit about what were the seeds that were sown that has allowed you to evolve into your profession, evolve into this, like finding your place on the planet. What were the seeds that were planted that kind of grew throughout your life?
Yeah, I think, I was the youngest of four kids, and there was just so much happening, right? Like my parents divorced when I was young. My eldest brother had challenges with drug abuse. And so there was really this like fly beneath the radar and just make sure everyone's okay.
Yeah.
And that kind of narrative has maintained. Like I had very little distress tolerance or conflict tolerance when I was a kid, and I always wanted everyone to just get along. I was just always seeking peace. And so that typically leads us into some sort of helping profession for the most part, which is where I took a psychology class in high school. I really liked it. Went on to undergrad here, or not even here anymore, at UNLV in psychology, went on for my master's in forensic psychology. And it was during that time that I was working in a juvenile lockup facility and then in a medium security prison for adult male sex offenders that I felt like I was entering too little too late, right? Like that there wasn't really a lot of prevention happening.
Yeah.
And there was so much emphasis on diagnosis and not so much on emotional fluency
Yeah.
that we're not really taught as we're growing up. And so that's where I had some of that identity crisis of like, okay, well, I was supposed to go on for my doctorate, and now I don't even agree with the traditional therapeutic model, and what do I do? And so I now went into the coaching space, more certifications in anger management, conflict resolution, mediation, and then eventually into this once my husband and I became parents, and it rocked us to our core, and we lost all identity, and it just overwhelmed our ability to cope. So now I've been able to pivot all of that information into what I could have really needed, what I could have really used when I was battling these kinds of identity crises.
So I'm curious, when you go into psychology, the whole aim is that you're finding a profession where you're going to help people, but
Yes.
you also have to heal. You also have self-discovery. How much of this journey has been surprising to you of what you've learned about yourself by proxy of getting into something that you are wanting to help other people discover?
That's such a good question because a lot of the time we get into therapy, it's one of two reasons. Either we want to run away from ourselves and just put ourselves entirely into other people, or we're trying to find answers about our upbringing, our family dynamics, ourselves. So I was more so the first one. I wasn't really focused very much on myself.
Yeah,
There were certain things that came up in grad school that I would learn, and then I'd go back to my husband, my boyfriend at the time, and say like, "Hey, like I recognize I kind of do this," and kind of volley off of that. My master's program was deeply rooted in knowing who you are. So we were writing self-reflection papers almost every week. We were recording ourselves in mocks and showing it to the whole class and really just picking ourselves apart. So there was that part that was more so, it was still surface for
yeah,
me. And I attempted to do the work without actually doing my own for quite some time until my husband and I had a crisis 4 years ago. And at that point, it was just like, okay, I can't go in to these sessions with these clients and be a fraud
yeah,
where I'm telling them what would work, what would benefit their lives, and I'm not applying the same things.
yeah.
And so I radically chose 4 years ago to do the work alongside, but it's a hard thing. It's why like a lot of the kids of mental health professionals are notoriously the most fucked up because we
Uh,
just we overanalyze other people and not enough on ourselves.
It's interesting you talk about being an example, especially for your kids and for your clients. I remember before I had my son, Miles, who's 20 now, I was like, I can't smoke anymore. Because my dad, I
Mhm.
watched him and it broke his heart because I was the youngest of three when I finally smoked. And I started smoking when I got into journalism in my 20s. And he was
Mm.
like, because I was a runner and I was healthy and I just wasn't going to do it, but I did it. And I remember that heartbreak. And I'm like, I can't do that to my kid. It's just they're going to watch what you do. That's the bottom line. And when you come from a coaching perspective, they're going to watch what you do. And if
Yeah.
you aren't doing what you tell them to do, it's kind of what maybe why you got disheartened with psychology. Like when you're following something that genuinely isn't standing up to the integrity that you had envisioned, it's this existential crossroads you have to come to.
Yeah, 100%. And that's where yeah, I mean, psychology just felt like it was arriving too late. It
Yeah,
was a reactive model versus proactive. And it wasn't really until I started seeing my kids affected by the conflict that me and my husband were having and my poor coping skills and these types of things that I we just made a choice
yeah,
that like this narrative has to be different. And I wasn't raised in a poor home. I was very loved. I had, just typical dad works too much and I don't see him enough and that kind of stuff.
yeah,
But there there were still plenty of things that I didn't want to repeat. And my parents were both immigrants. They didn't have the luxury of worrying about how they felt about things.
yeah,
And we do. And so because we have more access, more availability, more knowledge out there, I feel a responsibility to do the work on myself that they didn't have the luxury to. And I don't want my wounds to continue bleeding onto my kids.
yeah.
And that's been really, really hard to kind of have them hold a mirror to me because then I see them behaving in ways that I'm telling them not to, but I am. And so it was really just all my blind spots coming through to me from like this 1 and 3 year old who are just showing me up.
Yeah, that's it. So let me ask you this. Well, and the interesting thing about kids is it reminds me of one of my favorite lines of poetry from Bukowski, of all people, that we're born geniuses and buried idiots.
Mm,
And it's like they're these reflections of all the truth, and then we have all these walls, society and life and relationships. They just completely wall us into this, I don't know, almost like an Alcatraz, so to speak. And you're just like,
yeah.
there's all this water and stuff out there. What I want to get to it. Um, so when you decided that coaching was going to be your path, was there a client? Was there a moment? Did you have an epiphany? When did you realize that this was the life, this was the work that you needed to be doing?
So I had such a deep level of identity crisis after grad school.
Yeah,
Once I knew that I wasn't going to go down the traditional path, that I didn't know that this was an option at the time. I was trained in forensics, and so we just didn't talk about coaching. It was
yeah,
either you go on for your doctorate or you go on to licensure.
yeah,
And so I reached out to a friend of mine who was a therapist, and I told her, like, hey, this is where I'm at and I don't know what to do about it. And she suggested coaching. And I was deeply resistant to it up until literally a couple of weeks ago of identifying myself as a coach because I had misconceptions about it. And it's a deeply unregulated field. And there was that kind of part that I wanted to bring in my expertise and my training and not be perceived as some who get a quick certification over a weekend and then are doing this kind of work. And so there was like this dissonance that I had and judgment, internalized judgment for sure
Yeah.
about myself as a coach and about the coaching industry in general. And the more that I went into these additional certifications, I learned that in my anger management certification, I learned things that I didn't learn in 2 years of grad school about boundaries and what even anger management was. I got into it trying to fix my husband. So there were these types of things that came through that I learned. One, I'm part of the problem. Two, there are skills-based approaches that we aren't taking. And three, we are raising generations of deeply wounded people because we don't know how to regulate ourselves.
Yeah.
If in traditional parenting programs, they're all about the kid, about, hey, if your kid's having a tantrum, here's why their tantrum is happening and here's what you do for them. But I have yet to see anything that's saying, hey, well, when your kid is having a tantrum, I don't give a fuck what the reason is. Here's what you can do
Yeah.
about it for yourself to keep yourself regulated. And what about their tantrum is triggering something so deeply within you? And so these are the kind of skills-based approaches and mindfulness-based approaches that I was really desperate to take.
That's interesting because it takes two to tango. And I've thought about that with, when you get into that parenting lurch, like where is that coming from? And they watch
Yeah.
you. And it's hard for you to blame yourself. And then it turns into this self deprecating cycle because we're already hard on ourselves. That's the first step of any real therapeutic thing with most adults is that we
Yeah.
are hard on ourselves. And then once we start kind of realizing and forgiving and getting to a better place, then it will radiate out into our family and kids and everybody around us.
Yeah. And even that quote that you shared, it's so true. And I think that there was this conversation that I had with my mom at one point where I asked her like, when do you feel like a grown up? Like when do you feel like you've like arrived and you have things figured out? And I think she was in her 50s at the time and she was like, not yet. I don't know. I don't know if that ever really happens. And so that was disenchanting for me a bit because I
Yeah.
was like waiting for this like, okay, I'm here, I get it moment. And what I've learned to embrace is that we're never done. That it's
Right.
her first time living too. All of us are just trying to navigate this to the best of our capability. And I can't know what I don't know until I know it. And the idea that I would go through life knowing what to expect, knowing what to do in each situation is a self-betrayal. It's deceit.
Yeah.
And so that's really been one of the things that I've been trying to embrace throughout this whole process is that the time's going to pass anyway. And I have an opportunity to suffer through the current in order to perpetuate more suffering later, or I can suffer now and benefit later
Yeah.
and build this kind of emotional armor to be able to navigate these things. And also I'm desperate to have my kids want me around when they're adults, not just feel the need to keep me around
Yeah.
out of obligation or, well, it's my mom. What am I going to do?
Yeah.
And what I work with my clients on constantly, especially around the holidays, is like
Yeah.
I have to invite them. And I don't want that for them or
Yeah.
for me.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I totally get it. It's interesting because we spend all of this time as kids wanting to grow up. This thirst for independence leads to this wanting to adult, and adulting is so overrated. It's like
My God, it really is.
And
Yeah.
and I remember when I was in college, I took a poetry course, and there was a woman in the class that was in her 70s, and she was just kind of that traditional. She had real long, flowy gray hair and was kind of an old hippie. And we all went around the table, and everybody had to say what they wanted to do with their lives. And of course, she's in her 70s; she's lived through her life, and all the rest of us are saying what we want to do. And all I remember her saying, "I just don't want to grow up." And I remember absorbing that at that age and where she was at. And it's totally true because adulting and all of this stuff that you have to do when you get to this point, it's like I have a stepdaughter and I just kept telling her there was times where I would be like, just don't rush it. Just it's going to come. And then when you do it, you lose all of these things that you had no idea that you had to take control over, from hiring a trash service to doing this to do. I mean, it's just, it's nonstop,
Yeah.
and it's crazy.
Yeah. I
So
was listening to one of your other interviews where you shared about the fact that you find it important to share with kids the hardships of being an adult.
yeah,
And I completely agree with that. And so I
yeah,
talk to my kids often about how much this sucks and how much I don't like it.
yeah,
I think it's a bait and switch.
yeah,
And there's that part that I want them to be aware of what they're moving into. And that's what I recognized when I was doing this work on myself of like, what is it that is triggering me so much about my kids behaving in certain ways?
yep,
And it almost always came down to some level of envy.
yeah,
And it felt like resentment because resentment is rooted in envy.
right,
And it was that of like, you have no clue. And I didn't either.
yeah,
And now I'm watching you have no clue, but I feel like I have some power or control or influence over how you perceive this. And so, like, just get it.
yeah, right.
Realize how good you have it. Realize that, like, this is just, it's the best time. And whenever we talk about ages that we could go back to, a lot of the time we would want to go back to childhood, just not our childhood.
Right. Just a different, yeah, different version. It's interesting
Yeah.
too when you're a parent, that whole thing that you have to kind of analyze, which is nature and nurture. Like there's things that your kids are going to do that are totally of you, but you didn't teach them, and there was nothing
Yes.
about you that wanted them to do that. And then you just have to kind of stop and think, how much of this has been kind of harvested and grown into humanity that's just been completely out of your control. And it could be like that with, like, for instance, in Kansas City with Patrick Mahomes. He may have just been born with this ability, and his dad happened to be a player, and he grew up
Mm.
around all these stadiums. So whenever people always talk about him, like, how did you get to this point? This was a part of his DNA. He watched and analyzed how athletes interacted with reality, and then
Yeah.
how they cultivated that through conditioning and strength. Like all of those things, when we look at people and we think, how did you get here? It's all a part of your environment where you're at. And
Yeah. I
just
mean, it's
like,
a series of events.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. It doesn't just happen. It's not like, oh, well, he had a silver spoon. He had an advantage. It's like, no matter what you do, you got to work your ass off in anything that you do. Anything, anybody. Like, even if you're the son or daughter of a famous musician, you're not just going to get in. No one's just going to be like, oh, okay, that's so and so. I'm going to buy their album. No, you got to work. You got to be good at it.
Yeah.
There's just
Yeah,
no
and I
free
mean
pass.
there's going to be certain benefits that we might have
Right.
or access to opportunity, and it's us actually taking those opportunities when they're presented to us.
Yeah.
And that's really what I want my kids to be able to decipher very well for themselves is the path of least regret.
Yeah.
Of when something is presented to me, is it because am I denying it because it doesn't feel right and it isn't right, or just because it intimidates me and I'm fearful of failure?
Yeah.
And it's all of these kinds of like rich conversations that I want all of us to be able to have. And that's why I'm now so confident in the coaching space because I want all of us to be doing this work. I don't know a single person who couldn't benefit from
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing as I don't even know what it's called, educational literacy, reading literacy.
Sure.
There has to be a term for it. I should probably learn
Right.
it.
Yeah.
It's instead it's this emotional literacy
Mhm.
that we are not taught how to do. We are all like kids
Yeah.
walking around in adult bodies,
Uh-huh.
deceiving everyone, including ourselves, that we're grown.
Yeah.
And it's a wild thing. And then when you hear these types of people diminishing other people's success, I now don't give that life. I'm more so like, what opportunities do you think you missed out on?
Yeah. Right.
Where do you think that you were set up for failure from the get? And
Yeah.
like what happened for you?
Yeah. So who's been a hero for you? Who's been that inspirational force to allow you to evolve and define your place, your work-life balance in your life?
That's kind of non-existent at this point. I don't quite have, that's a really good question. I don't even know that I have somebody that I'm really looking up to as a creator and as somebody who shares insight with the world without coming off in like a salesy, sleazy kind of way. Ali Abdal on YouTube, I absolutely adore. I think that he presents information in such beautiful ways. When it comes to the mental health space, people like Esther Perel, I really respect.
Yeah.
There's something about being able to articulate how you're feeling in such a clean way that inspires other people to do the same
Yeah.
that I really love. And then fictional character is Leslie Knope from Parks and Rec.
Oh
I
yeah.
every time I'm like, okay, no, I want to rest. I'm like, what would she do? No, she would like get up and do this and get this
That's
done
it.
and do it really well.
What a great show. Why can't they just clone that? Like clone it into different incarnations? Because it's like once you get to the end of the show, like my wife is like, I can't watch the last episode. We've been stuck on Ted Lasso. It's like, let's just get over it. We we
I
we
know.
we're birthed, we're gonna die. We just gotta go through the process. But you do get to the point where it's like at the end of Parks and Rec, you're like, oh no, how am I gonna
Yeah.
laugh at the end of the day? How is that gonna happen now? You know? So
Yeah. The amount of times I've rewatched that
oh,
show
it's
in the
just
background is insane. That and Friends and
yeah.
New Girl and all of those that just because we get so deeply connected and we see parts of ourselves in so many of these
Hmm.
characters and also parts of ourselves that we would really aspire to be. And then once their story ends, it's like, well, where does mine go? It's
Uh-huh.
like, look, ma, no hands. Like now I just gotta like figure out life.
That's it.
Yeah.
It's like it's the end of childhood and you got to be an adult. You got to go out into the world and, find your own food. Um
Yeah.
so let me ask you this. If you had a dream tonight ran into the 18-year-old version of you and you could give that young version of you a piece of advice based on this life you've led, what advice would you give that young version?
Oh gosh. I would want her to do the work on herself because she was running away from herself constantly.
Hmm.
And more so, just lead with intuition. If your intuition tells you that this is good, and like when she's talking to you,
Yeah.
if if it's speaking to you, do it and figure out a way to not let judgments or fears affect you.
So you got to deal with a lot of heavy stuff in coaching and even in psychology.
Hmm.
If you walked into a room of everybody that you knew from either all of those years of education or all of your clients, and you swim through that room of people, go to a podium, and you could tell them one fun story, one fun anecdote, one fun tale that has happened in your life that would humanize you in a different way to that group, what would you tell them? Fun fact, first concert, something like that.
Oh, something more fun. Um, I really I still go back to not so fun of
Yeah.
just recognizing how we contribute.
Right.
That like we are contributing poorly and we are also contributing positively. And the
Right.
story that I oftentimes tell from the professional side is that I got in anger management in an attempt to fix my husband and
Yeah.
like infiltrate him from within. And then about 2 hours into my certification, I had this like room shrinking around me, dawn of like, oh my God, I'm the problem too. So
Yeah.
it's really just about like being willing to recognize that if there's something in my dynamic that's not working, I'm also contributing to it.
Yeah.
And the other fun fact that we tend to hear that I typically don't want repeated, but I will hear
Yeah.
is that I introduced my husband to his twin brother because I didn't know that they were twins. And I
Oh,
was friends with both of them and
wow.
didn't know that they knew each other. And that was my embarrassing story of my life.
Wow, that's wild.
Yeah, it's
So,
very silly.
so along that same line, have you seen the video of Bill Burr getting introduced to Billy Corgan and they're like half brothers?
No.
Howie Mandel brought Billy Corgan in and thought it would be cute, and I guess maybe he's that kind of guy where he's like, he knows how to get ratings. Obviously, he's been around, so he
Uh-huh.
brings Billy Corgan in, and Burr's like, "What the fuck are you guys doing right now? This is not funny." So I guess Bill Burr's dad ran around a lot, and they're yeah, look it up. It's crazy. But you can see the video of them walking in, and Bill Burr finally kind of calms down, and Corgan's just sitting there like you could just see his body language like this, like he just didn't know what was going on. He thought he was invited into this cauldron of goodwill, and it was a lion's den, and it's like, wow. So anyway,
Gnarly. Well, I wish mine was that I did that research and I and I solved
right.
something that other people hadn't solved. It was
Yeah.
obvious to everyone but me, which is
It,
really unfortunate.
it's life. That's just life.
Uh-huh.
I mean, it's like I think when you get old enough, you realize truth is way stranger than fiction. Like what we weave naturally will far outdo any book, any fictional book that's been written. Just it will,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah, and it's also leading with assumption that people know what I do or that
Yeah.
people would just figure it out. And
Yeah.
it's one of those signs of the growth that I'm doing and that before I was mortified when people would tell that story. I didn't know how to like feel silly
Right.
without that becoming something inherently about me.
Right.
And my brother-in-law told that story at our wedding, and I was like, oh, like I don't want people like perpetuating this, talking about this.
Yeah.
And now I'm here just sharing it everywhere because it's just, it doesn't matter. It's a funny story. It doesn't mean that it's inherently about me being a dumb,
Right.
imperceptive, if that's even a word, non-perceptive
Yeah.
human. It's just so silly.
Well, time heals all wounds. I mean, it's like you just get to a point where it's like you just got to move on. So let me ask you this: of everything that you've done, all of the evolution that you've done in your life, what are you ultimately the proudest of?
I am the most proud of the version of me that I've been able to resurrect after becoming a parent.
Yeah.
In my marriage and in my ability to communicate and connect with my kids. That has to be the biggest thing. It permeates everything and it ripples through every aspect of our lives. And us being able to still be in this marriage 13 years in and thriving and flirting and loving each other really hard and having our kids witness that in a household, witness love and joy and play and all of this is by far my greatest accomplishment.
But that's the definition of a relationship too, because it's not easy. And everybody, we have all these Hollywood versions of everything, but it's hard and you have to
Hmm.
evolve and you have to grow. And there's no book to that. They don't teach you that. You literally have to go out into the world and figure it out. And if you can do that and not give up, and then you can make it work and your kids see that, then you've hit the trifecta. You've got everything figured out, you know?
Yeah,
No,
for now,
yeah, for
until the
now,
next
right.
yeah.
Because, yeah, because we all are figuring it out. We're all students. So ultimately, at the end of the day, everyone has a perception of you: family, friends, clients, everyone that knows you, but you run the show. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
I am somebody who's still working through it, right? I'm not a guru. I'm not a know-it-all. I don't think I'm above anyone. It's instead that I'm moving through this with you hand in hand.
Yeah.
And I'm with you.
So if anyone wants to hire you, they have any questions, they're ready to go to the next step in their lives to get over anger and find a better place, where's the best place to go to do that?
Yeah, any social is a steady space. It's the name of my practice. So I wanted people to be able to come in, get steady, find that balance, and go back out into the world. So that's my handle on all social media is
Okay.
a steady space and my same website. We're
Okay.
launching a program called the Parental Shift, and it's not a parenting program. It's a program for parents for
Okay.
us to come in and figure out who we are underneath everything that parenthood buried.
Okay. So yeah, and it varies a lot. So I'll put all that in the show notes. This has been wonderful. Thank you so much for your story. Thank you for opening up. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. I appreciate you.
Thank you. Hello, friends. Joe Dimino here. I just wanted to let you know that after 30 years or so, I have finally released my first book of poetry through the mighty Spartan Press here in Kansas City, Missouri. As the creator and host of both Neon Jazz Radio and the Famous Interviews with Joe Dimino podcast, along with being a visual artist, I'm ready to embark on a new adventure and want you to be a part of it. You can get a copy online via Barnes & Noble, Amazon, and actually on the streets in Kansas City at the great Prospero's bookstore off 39th Street. You can also visit joedimino.com for links to the book, to more poetry, and everything in my world, including paintings. Thanks for all of the love and support over the years, and please dig the words.